Our purpose is to inform communities about the increased transportation risks they'll experience if WIPP is expanded, as the DOE, the Department of Energy, is planning to do to hold more nuclear waste. Also, we want to explain that the DOE is violating state and federal law by changing the mission in the way that it is. These are the NGOs that I use as monitoring organizations. They clarify and verify information, and all the data that is in this presentation comes from government sources unless otherwise noted. The WIPP facility is in southeastern New Mexico. This is an important slide because it shows southeastern New Mexico, where several nuclear facilities either already are or are being proposed. And so I show this because I want us just to focus on the WIPP facility that is in operation and has been since 1999, and it's very close to Carlsbad. It's important to know what the original WIPP mission is, which happens to still be the mission, so that you can compare it to how the federal government wants to change it. It's the only operating underground nuclear waste repository in the United States, and it's only authorized to take nuclear weapons waste, so no commercial waste from nuclear power plants. When New Mexico negotiated for WIPP with the federal government, it included limits. And it included limits because it knew it was just one state, and it was negotiating with the entire nation, and that the entire nation sometimes becomes involved in federal overreach. And so it set these limits. And what are they? Number one, WIPP is a pilot plant only. It's in the name. It's supposed to be one of many around the country. Two, WIPP's mission, its volume is limited down to the cubic foot. What you see here is the repository, the buildings on the surface, the 4 shafts that carry waste and equipment and personnel down about 2,000 feet into the salt beds. The salt beds then are built up with panels, and inside each panel is a room. The rooms are the length of 3 football fields. And this is the size that WIPP was planned to be. 3, the permit closes WIPP in 25 years. That means it's to stop taking waste in 2024 with 10 years for closure. This is a RCRA permit, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act permit. And 4th, WIPP only takes a certain kind and form of waste. It's called transuranic or true waste. It's man-made and radioactive. And for our purposes, what we need to know about this waste at WIPP is that it's mostly the element plutonium. So WIPP takes plutonium or true waste that is contaminated from the production of nuclear weapons only. It's what you see in these X-ray drums, protective clothing, tools, sludges. It does not take what you see on the right, pure concentrated plutonium, like in this pit. A nuclear pit is a trigger in a nuclear weapon, and it contains the pure metallic plutonium. Now, these limits are encoded into legally binding permits, laws, agreements, and even an act, and they're still in place. They can't be ignored and must first be legally or administratively changed before DOE can change the mission. So I've listed 4 of the important limits here. And what's important to know is that it's New Mexico's way of telling the federal government, you can't overreach without our permission. So shipments go to LANL and WIPP from labs and military installations across the country. The waste is called legacy waste, and it's old waste from the Cold War. Again, just contaminated items. This waste goes to Los Alamos, and from Los Alamos, it travels along the designated radioactive waste route, which is primarily Highway 285 down to WIPP. What happens to the waste at Lannel? It packages the waste for WIPP in these drums. As you see, you can carry up to 14 of these drums, and the drums are then placed inside a container called a TruPact. The TruPact is insulated. It's designed to protect the drums from a traffic accident or some kind of rollover, and then these containers are put on tractor trailers and taken to WIPP. And that's WIPP as it was and as it is now. So how do we know that DOE has decided to change the mission? Well, we go to the Federal Register and it's all laid out there. So about 2 years ago, the DOE issued a notice of intent to do this mission. It has been very secretive and not spoken about this to the public in any way. But now, just about 2 months ago, it released a draft environmental impact statement for this surplus plutonium program. And so now it's public. It took us 2 years to get it to be public. They still haven't spoken to the public about it, though. And then the National Academies of Sciences was requested by Congress to write a report showing some of the details of how this would act, how it would play out. Again, we were not able to get the National Nuclear Security Administration or the DOE to talk to us about it. But now it's official. The DOE and the NNSA have publicly issued a new permit request. And so that's what we know and how we know it. Just briefly, we now have this draft environmental impact statement, which tells us what it intends to do with the nation's surplus plutonium. For that, you need to know what the surplus plutonium is and where it comes from. It's leftover plutonium from the triggers of decommissioned nuclear weapons. So in 1967, the United States had about 31,000 armed and ready nuclear bombs. Now it has about 5,000. That's because of treaties and negotiations. Now there's 48 tons of plutonium that's still there. You know, even though the nuclear weapons have been decommissioned, the plutonium is still there and it's still very dangerous. Most of it is at the Pantex plant in Amarillo, Texas. And then we've had the details of the permit expansion confirmed by the permit renewal that has been submitted by the DOE to the New Mexico Environment Department, NMED. So what we know now leads to our concerns. Concern number one is the increased volume. What you see here in blue is the original volume of WIPP. It's what WIPP was allowed to be. What you see in green is what the DOE wants to build out WIPP in terms of size to be, and then in place waste in it. And so the red circle shows you what the entire volume of WIPP will be if they expand. That makes it more than twice as large as it currently is. Well, that leads us to concern number two. You can see that no one's going to be able to build out this much infrastructure and fill it with waste by 2024. And so indeed, it will be increased time needed. The new permit now has no end date. It has had dates such as 2083. It looks like it's planning to keep WIPP open forever. Concern three is the distance. Most of this waste, the surplus plutonium, is at Pantex in Amarillo, Texas, but it can't go directly to WIPP. And so it has to be processed. And what they're planning to do is truck it across to Los Alamos for processing, and then truck it back across Interstate 40, all the way across to South Carolina to the Savannah River site for more processing. And then from there, across Interstate 20 for final disposal at WIPP. That's a 3,300-mile road trip for every shipment of this waste. Concern 4 is that the waste will be different. It will no longer just be waste that has been contaminated in the production of of atomic weapons. It will be pure plutonium from those actual pits. So in the form of this solid plutonium that's at Pantex near Amarillo, Texas, the waste will be trucked across Interstate 40, past all of this really productive ranch and farmland. And it climbs corners, it goes up to 285, past our neighborhoods, around Santa Fe, and up to Los Alamos. And it will be coming back again. We'll see that in just a minute. What happens to the waste at Los Alamos? At Lanel, it's oxidized into a fine, silty powder. And so now it's not only a different type of plutonium waste, but it's the most dangerous form of plutonium if released. And then it comes back past all of our neighborhoods once again. So we're going to be exposed to this traffic of the same shipment of plutonium twice. Goes through 5 pueblos, which of course include farmlands. Back past that productive farm and ranch land, along Interstate 40. When it gets to Amarillo, it continues on. And this is what it looks like on a map of the entire United States. First, it goes from Pantex to Lanel, then from Lanel across Interstate 40 to South Carolina for more processing. And then from South Carolina, it comes back along Interstate Highway 20 for final disposal at WIPP. So that's at least 11 states that it goes through. And for more than half of it, it will not be in those true packs that we looked at before. Instead, this is concern 5, that will be a different type of transport. It will be with the Office of Secure Transportation. This is an actual semi-tractor trailer truck with that office. It looks like one that would go to Walmart, but this is an actual OST semi. They are somewhat reinforced and they're accompanied by armed federal agents. However, the Los Angeles Times recently, in 2017, wrote a story that called this a troubled agency with high driver turnover, poor worker morale, and old trucks that need maintenance but no money to upgrade. And so its mission now is to carry nuclear weapons across the country. And if it's struggling with that mission and you add a new one, you can see that it could be a problem. Indeed, a high-level Energy Department official was quoted anonymously in that article as saying, if you are in one of the communities along the route, you have something to worry about. Concern 6 is property loss. Sandia Labs did a site remediation study for what would happen if particulate plutonium, that's the kind we're talking about, were released over land. And so if it were released over, say, farm and ranch land, that's topsoil would have to be scraped. And all of that productive land would be lost. If it were released over communities and buildings, they say that it's almost impossible to clean those up and they would have to be abandoned. So these are our homes and our schools and our businesses. Concern 7 is the health effects of this kind of plutonium. It is so fine and silty and such small particles that if it's released, it is very quickly carried on breezes and winds, and anyone who is outside inhales it. They won't know they've inhaled it because you can't taste or feel it. And it goes into the lungs, and most of it is not exhaled. Instead, it gets lodged in lung tissue like this particle of plutonium. This is in an animal lung. And then it sits there and provides an ongoing and continuous source of radiation, which to the cells, all the cells nearby. And so that's what causes cancer of the liver, the lungs, and the bones. It also, they've discovered, causes cancer of the brain and the gonads. So the Nobel Peace Prize winning organization, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, says that less than a millionth of an ounce, something you could not even possibly see, of particulate plutonium inhaled causes cancer 100% of the time. And you can see that if it takes maybe months to years for these cancers to develop, that puts children the most at risk. It's also a problem for emergency crews. I can't understand how they would be able to come to an area, determine that it has been contaminated, and then prevent people from breathing before they even knew about a release. Concern 8 is packaging. This is how this type of plutonium is packaged, first in a metal container, and then that metal container is placed inside a PVC plastic bag to contain contamination, and then that is placed in one of these two types of containers you see here. They're finding, however, that the heat from the radioactive decay of the plutonium inside the metal box degrades the plastic bag that is holding it. And sometimes it degrades it to the point that it actually causes corrosion on the metal container. So what promises out of those first 4 limits that we heard about has DOE's planned mission broken with New Mexico? It's broken every one of them. No repositories have been built in other states. The volume will be expanded by more than twice. WIPP won't close in 2024, but they're planning on keeping it open essentially forever. And a new, more dangerous waste will be placed in WIPP. And this is where you have to know your probabilities. It's very difficult to analyze risk, but if you increase the volume of waste, the number of shipments, the time it's going to be transported, and the distance over which it's going to be transported, and your waste is more dangerous, and you have other problems with packaging and transportation, then as adults, we know that accidents happen. And it's probably a matter of time before an accident happens with this program. And for that community that it happens in, it will be catastrophic. So what to do? First, we think keep it where it is, build more repositories nearer the waste. Second, make DOE follow the laws that it agreed to. They are still in place, and the state of New Mexico simply needs to say no. Clean up the poor safety culture. Every couple of weeks, we see headlines in our local paper talking about some problem with safety culture at LANL and WIPP. And finally, stop making more. There's a whole new waste stream that they're planning on generating. They want to start, the federal government wants to start making 30 new plutonium pits per year at LANL and 50 new ones at South Carolina. So 80 new triggers for new nuclear weapons for decades. We don't know what to do with the old plutonium. Why are we making new plutonium? And important actions for the public is to make comments. These comments that we've set up today for you to work on, and it will be very easy. It won't take long. And contact information is this. Thank you.